His phone buzzed at 2:14 in the afternoon. Chris was at his desk, a government building in downtown Augusta, the kind of place where the air conditioning hums louder than the people. He glanced down out of habit, the way you do 100 times a day without thinking. 3 words: "We need to talk." No punctuation after it. No "tonight." No "when you get home." No little heart she used to put at the end of everything. Just those 3 words sitting there on the screen, like a stone dropped into still water. He knew. Of course he knew. A man always knows before he lets himself know. He'd felt it for weeks. The way she'd started sleeping facing the wall. The way "I love you" had gone from a sentence to a reflex. The way her laugh didn't reach him across the room anymore. But knowing and reading it are 2 different things. He set the phone face down on the desk. His chest felt tight, like someone had reached in and slowly closed a fist around something soft. And then he did the thing that almost nobody talks about. He kept working. There were 3 hours and 46 minutes left in his shift. A weaker version of him would have walked out, told his supervisor he felt sick, driven home doing 80 on Washington Road, called her crying, begged for an explanation he didn't really want. But Chris was 28, and somewhere along the way life had taught him a hard, quiet lesson. The world does not stop for your heartbreak. The forms still needed filing. The phone still rang. A man named Mr. Harris still needed his paperwork sorted, and couldn't know that the young man helping him had just watched the floor open up beneath his feet. So Chris smiled at Mr. Harris. He said, "Yes, sir, let me pull that up for you." His voice did not shake. There is a kind of strength nobody hands you a medal for. It's the strength of finishing what you started while your whole inside is on fire. It's showing up when showing up is the last thing your body wants to do. Marcus Aurelius wrote it down 2,000 years ago, scribbling notes to himself by candlelight that he never meant for anyone to read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Chris hadn't read Marcus Aurelius yet. That would come later, in the long nights ahead. But he was living it that afternoon, one filed form at a time. The clock ticked. 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:45. He finished the shift. To understand what was ending, you have to understand how it began. Her name doesn't matter, not anymore, not for this story. What matters is who she was when he met her. She was in nursing school then, exhausted all the time, surviving on gas station coffee and stubbornness, carrying a backpack heavier than she was. Chris met her at a friend's cookout off Wheeler Road, and he remembered thinking he had never seen anyone so tired and so determined at the same time. They were good in the beginning. The kind of good you don't appreciate until it's gone. He used to quiz her on flashcards at midnight, butchering the names of muscles and bones until she laughed so hard she cried. When she had her panic attacks before exams, and she had a lot of them, he'd sit on the bathroom floor with her and just breathe, in and out, until her shoulders dropped. "You're going to be the best nurse in that whole hospital," he'd tell her. And 6 months ago she graduated. He sat in the audience in his one good shirt, and when they called her name, he stood up and hollered like a fool, and she found his face in the crowd and mouthed, "Thank you." That was the high point. He just didn't know it yet. Because here is the truth that took him a long time to admit. He was so good at carrying her through her storm that he never learned how to live in the calm. When she started working at the hospital, everything changed. But slowly, the way a tide goes out. You don't see it leave. You just look up one day and the water's gone. She had purpose now. 12-hour shifts, a badge with her name on it, co-workers who became her world. She was becoming someone. And Chris stayed the same. That's the part he's not proud of. While she was climbing, he was coasting. Same job, same routine, same complaints he'd been making for 2 years. He'd come home and scroll his phone for hours. He stopped going to the gym. He stopped going to church. The church his grandmother had raised him in, the one place that used to make him feel like more than the sum of his bad days. He let himself go soft, not just in body but in spirit, and he took it out on her without ever raising his voice. He got quiet, he got moody, When she'd come home glowing about a patient she'd helped, he'd grunt from the couch. When she asked what was wrong, he'd say nothing. That great lie men tell. He made her feel like her good news was an inconvenience to his bad mood. He neglected her, not with cruelty, with absence. He was right there in the apartment and 1,000 miles away. There's a proverb he'd heard as a boy and forgotten as a man. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. He had stopped sharpening her. He'd gone dull, and he'd let her dull too, just by being near him. A man can lose a woman without ever doing a single dramatic thing. He can lose her in 100 small evenings of saying nothing. He came home that night and she was already there, sitting at the little kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. He'd had 4 hours to prepare for this. He'd rehearsed a dozen versions in his head. None of them helped. She didn't yell. That's what he remembers most. He almost wished she had. Anger would have been easier to hold than the gentleness in her voice. "I don't think I'm in love with you anymore," she said, "and I don't think I have been for a while. And I think you know that too." He wanted to argue. He wanted to list every flashcard, every bathroom floor, every time he'd shown up. He wanted to say, "I carried you." But even as the words formed, he knew they were the wrong words, the words of a man keeping score instead of keeping love. So he didn't say them. "Did I do this?" he asked instead. His voice finally broke, just a little, on the last word. She looked at him for a long moment. "We did this," she said. "But you stopped being here a long time ago, Chris. And I got tired of being lonely next to somebody." That sentence would live in him for months. Lonely next to somebody. There was no other man, at least none she'd admit to, and he chose not to dig for ghosts. Maybe there was. Maybe there was just the slow betrayal of two people who let a good thing starve. Whatever it was, he decided that night that he would not turn her into a villain to make himself feel better. She had grown, he had stalled, and she'd done the brave thing he was too scared to do. She'd told the truth. She moved out over the next 2 weeks, civil, careful. They split the dishes like adults. The worst fights are the ones that never happen. And then he was alone in a 1-bedroom apartment that suddenly felt enormous. The first nights were the hardest. He'd reach across the bed out of habit and find cold sheets. He'd cook for 2 and throw half of it away. The silence in that apartment had a sound, and the sound was everything he'd failed to say. This is the part of the story most men hide. The crying in the truck in the parking lot. The phone held in a shaking hand, scrolling old photos at 3 in the morning. The shame, God, the shame, of being a grown man brought to his knees by an empty apartment. One night, somewhere near the bottom, he did something he hadn't done since he was a boy. He got down on the floor of that empty bedroom and he prayed. He didn't have fancy words. He just said, "Lord, I don't even know what I'm asking for. I just can't carry this by myself anymore." And in the quiet that followed, a verse came back to him. One his grandmother used to say when life got heavy. "Be still and know that I am God. Be still." He'd spent 2 years numb, mistaking numbness for stillness. This was different. This was the first honest stillness he'd felt in a long time, the kind where you stop running from yourself. Healing didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came like a sunrise. So slow you can't catch the exact moment it happens, but one day you realize it's no longer dark. It started with a single decision. I am not going to waste this pain. He found an old book at a second-hand shop on Broad Street. Meditations by a Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius. He almost put it back. Then he read one line standing in the aisle. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What stands in the way becomes the way. He bought it for $2 and read it cover to cover that week. The Stoics gave him a language for what his grandmother's faith had already been teaching him. That he could not control whether she loved him, but he could control who he became. He couldn't control the past, but he owned every single tomorrow. There is a line drawn through the middle of the world, and on one side are the things that happen to you, and on the other are the things you do about them. A man's whole life is decided by which side he chooses to live on. He thought about Romans 2. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. He'd always skipped over that verse before. Now he understood it. The suffering wasn't punishment. It was raw material. He started small. He couldn't fix his life in a day, but he could make his bed. He could go for a walk along the Augusta Riverwalk at dawn. He could go back to church on Sunday and let the old hymns crack him open. Small things, stacked one on top of the other, the way a man rebuilds anything that matters. 6 months after that text, Chris was a different man. Not a new one, but the one he'd buried under 2 years of giving up. He'd lost the weight. He'd gone back to the gym, then started running, then signed up for a 10K along the river just to prove to himself he could finish something hard. He did finish. He cried at the finish line, and this time they were not the same kind of tears. He went after a promotion at work he'd been too checked out to chase before. He got it. The raise wasn't life-changing, but the feeling of being chosen, of being someone worth betting on again, that was everything. He repaired the friendships he'd let rot during the relationship. He called his mother more. He volunteered with the youth group at his grandmother's church, sitting on bathroom floors with teenage boys who didn't have the words yet for what they were feeling, passing on the only thing he knew how to give. Breathe in and out. You're going to make it. And somewhere in all of it, the anger he'd been waiting to feel toward her never came, because here is what he finally understood. She didn't break him. She freed him. By being brave enough to walk away, she handed him the one thing he'd been too comfortable to give himself, a reason to change. He ran into her once, months later, in the cereal aisle of the Kroger on Walton Way, of all the places. She looked good, happy even. She had that nurse's tiredness she'd worn so well back in school, but underneath it, peace. They talked for maybe 4 minutes. The weather, her job, his promotion. She said, "I knew you had it in you," and she meant it, and it didn't hurt the way he thought it would. And as she pushed her cart away, Chris stood there holding a box of cereal, and he felt something he never expected to feel. Gratitude, not for the way it ended, for the way it woke him up. He whispered something under his breath, half a prayer, half a stoic's farewell. "Thank you. I hope you're loved the way you deserved to be loved. I'm sorry I forgot how, for a while. I won't forget again." Then he went home to his apartment, the same one, but it didn't feel enormous anymore. It felt like a place where a man was building a life. He'd gotten the text at 2:14 on an ordinary afternoon. He'd thought it was the end of his world. It turned out to be the beginning of him,